Although it's Thursday in the rest of the world, today in Parliament it's still Wednesday. We're sitting under urgency, which means that Wednesday is likely to go through Thursday, Friday and possibly into Saturday. But a practice has developed in recent years of when the House is sitting under urgency to do a special breakout for question time, and that's what's going to happen today. The first question is from Kiri Allen to the Minister of Finance about the international context for the New Zealand economy. Nikki Kay to the Prime Minister, likely to be Winston Peters acting for the Prime Minister today, about quarantine. Marama Davidson to the Minister of Conservation about Maui and Hector's dolphins. Paul Goldsmith to the Minister of Finance about the IMF and OECD predictions for the New Zealand economy. Michael Woodhouse to the Minister of Health about his responsibility for the oversight of testing of individuals for COVID-19. Jan Tinetti to the Minister of Education about pay for teacher aides. Chris Bishop to the Minister of Transport about Auckland Light Rail and the costs. The Hon Dr Nick Smith to the Minister of Justice about the third reading of the Electoral Registration of Sentences Prisoners Amendment Bill. Duncan Webb, also this time asking the Minister of Fisheries about the protections for Hector's and Maui dolphin. Stuart Smith to the Minister of Immigration about how many people have entered New Zealand under the other critical worker border closure exemption category. Matt Ducey to the Minister of Health about the spending on mental health, and Maia Lubeck to the Minister of Workplace Relations about initiatives that he's announced this week to assist industries and workers deal with the COVID recovery. So after that, we'll go back into urgency. So the House today sitting from 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and then tonight from 7 o'clock until midnight. We'll actually be back here at 9 o'clock in the morning. The Resource Management Bill committee stages and third readings in the name of David Parker. The Taxation Bill, the first reading, continuation of that in the name of Grant Robertson. And then a lot of second readings. The Education and Training Bill in the name of Chris Hipkins. The Public Service Legislation Bill in the name again of Chris Hipkins. The Superannuation and Veterans Pensions Legislation Amendment Bill in the name of Carmel Sepuloni. The Equal Pay Amendment, second reading in the name of Ian Nees Galloway. Rates Rebate Statutory Declarations Amendment Bill in the name of Nanaia Mahuta. The Water Services Regulator Bill, again in the name of Nanaia Mahuta. The Films, Videos and Publications Classification in the name of Tracy Martin. The Te Turi Whenua Māori Bill in the name of Nanaia Mahuta. The Urban Development Bill in the name of Phil Twyford. And the NZTA Land Transport Legislation Amendment Bill in the name of Phil Twyford. If we get through that, we'll go on to the International Crimes and International Criminal Court Amendment Bill, second reading in the name of Winston Peters, and the third reading of the Privacy Bill in the name of Andrew Little. So you can see we've got quite a stack of work to do here in Parliament, here till midnight, and then back again at 9 o'clock in the morning.